What's up, you guys? Welcome to another episode of the Wholehearted podcast. I'm Tyler, your wandering therapist, here with Chase,
the pondering creator, and we got an extra visitor. This is August Robert Jones. He's chilling with us. This is my son. He came out with us this morning. So
yeah, we got him adventuring. We're out here where people come in Providence Canyon, Utah. They come shoot their guns, and he's managed to throw about every kind of bullet casing in his mouth that you can think of right now. So good thing his mom's not here to see our supervision.
Yeah, real quality stuff going on. Oh man.
Yeah, well, Chase, it's been a while since we've done one of these things, and we've wanted to kind of continue to move forward with just talking about our core principles at Love Strong. And our first core principle that we talked about was the wrestle with God.
Right.
And
that was a good episode. That was a lot of fun shooting that.
That was a good episode. Yeah, it was a meaningful episode for me. Yeah. I know that I felt really connected to you, and I felt connected to God just in shooting the episode.
Absolutely, man. I feel the exact same way.
And so today we wanted to just continue to move down what we call the 12 pillars of wholehearted living. And this one falls under the category of pursuing a connection with God, but another principle of wholehearted living, and it's called humility, breathing gratitude.
Right, and the symbol for this one is grain. So part of the reason we chose that symbol is because it's such a basic element of our food and diet. Rice, barley, wheat, anything that is common to humanity, and it's just thinking about the connection it has to a simple food for simple life. I think that's part of the reason that it was one that I was thinking of. Thinking of.
Yeah, that's what I love about the symbols, is they all really do mean something that goes along with the principle. So this is an interesting one, Chase, because when you hear the word humility, and when you think about how the world defines the word humility, what comes to mind?
Weakness. That's the first thing that hits my mind is weakness. But I know that's not the reality of it, right?
Right.
And that's part of the reason we chose this. So why to you what do you think of when people?
Right. Same as you. In the world, that's seen as weak. It's seen as vulnerable. It's seen as like you're going to get walked on. I also think that when I hear the word humility, at least the way that I was kind of raised, and it wasn't intentional, but the way that I interpreted things is that humility was that you had to be self-deprecating, you had to beat yourself up, and you had to acknowledge nothing but your faults. Mm. And I think we've mistaken that, and we've made humility a bad word, when in reality it might be one of the best attributes that any human being could ever possess.
Oh, it's so true. Because when you think about the people that you know that embody that quality, the way that we know it to be, the truth of it, those are the people that I like the most.
Yeah.
I want to spend all day with them.
Yeah, you want to spend all your time with them, you respect them, you look up to them, and you find yourself wanting to be like them. And yet, in the world's standards, they might be seen in a different way, And I remember having a shift in the way that I viewed the principle of humility as I was moving through different stages in my life. And at one point in my life, when I was serving a mission for our church, I had some experiences that taught me a different view of humility. And then when I got into my own recovery later on, in more recent years, I heard a definition of humility that I really, really liked. And the definition was that if I'm going to be humble, I have to be willing to accept everything that God says I am. Not just the weakness and the faults and the flaws, which there are many, right?
Yeah.
But I have to also, if I'm going to be humble, I have to also accept everything He says that I am on the good side, in order to be humble. And that isn't how the world defines it.
No. So this last week, you and I had a conversation yesterday where I was sitting outside the front of your office journaling, and you came out and were asking me some questions, and I eventually told you, dude, I feel terrible today.
Yeah.
Like, just emotionally destroyed. And after doing some processing and having some really humbling experiences, and I'll share a couple of those experiences. One of them was going home and seeing my wife and telling her, hey, it's been a rough day today, and I don't really know why. I just feel heavy. And her pouring out love and just wanting to console me and hold me and tell me, hey, you're great. You are a good man. That was one thing. Another thing was, while that was going on, I'm just sitting there on the couch kind of fighting with those terms. Because, when you're not feeling great and somebody tells you those things, you're like,
You
yeah,
don't
whatever.
believe them.
Yeah, you don't believe that. And then looking down, and we've got August, who's just staring up at me, just sweet little face, like not make as gentle and mild as he can be, just like on my knee looking up at me,
Awesome.
And that feeling was just so good that it helped kind of calm me some more. And then the last thing was just having dinner with Chelsea and August, and as the sun was going down, I just kind of looked around and noticed how much I have to be grateful for. And it kind of helped me wash away the focus that I had on myself and focus on the things that matter the most, which is family to me, a feeling of connection to God, and then just being immensely grateful for the simple things that God has given me. So that helped a ton. And I know you asked this morning, maybe that was 2 days ago, but you asked this morning, are you feeling better? I'm like, I feel great. I feel like that burden has been lifted. And part of the reason that it came on is because I was so focused recently with sharing my own vulnerable story and going through, watching the video. You look at your weaknesses and you say, I'm only weak. I have so many flaws. I'm terrible at this. Whatever the thing is, you focus so much on that thing if you're not truly being humble. There's a difference between being weak and being humble, or being feeble and timid versus knowing your strengths, knowing your weaknesses, and being okay with that, being accepting of that.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you tapped into a couple things that go along with this core principle, and the way that you were able to climb out of the pit that you were in that place of shame and doubt and fear that you were wrestling with a couple of days ago, was that you were able to tap into gratitude. Another principle that is the twin sister of humility, in seeing that there's so much to be grateful for in your life, and as you start to expand in gratitude for those things, it pulls you out of the self-centered tunnel that you were in, and it lets you see yourself in context of the bigger world and the bigger purpose in life. And so as you pulled yourself out of that, now you can tap into everything again that God says you are. And it's funny that you were in that spiral because you had just gone and shared your story.
Yeah.
And the reason you're sharing your story is for the benefit of other people, because there's a gift that you have to give to the world that you had lost sight of and lost touch with in terms of what God was wanting you to do in that moment.
Right, the whole purpose. Yeah. Oh, it was so funny, that torrent. And I think you experienced something kind of similar, right? Where you share this story about the trials that you face, the burdens that the poor choices that you make, and you expose that to the world and you say, this is who I am. And then afterwards you're like, oh, I hate myself, I'm the worst. But the truth is, you're not the worst. Those are all experiences that made you who you are, and you have so much to offer. It's funny to me how quickly you can lose sight of that.
Oh, so quickly. And that's where shame comes in, which is the opposite of wholehearted living, right?
Yeah.
And little August is getting a little bit sorry. But I was just thinking, as you're talking, when we look at the principle of humility, we look at the perfect exemplar of humility, at least in our minds and in our world, is Jesus Christ.
Absolutely.
And when you think of that, that doesn't line up very well with how we view humility in the world, where did Christ ever show up in the scriptures and be like, guys, I'm terrible. Like, I'm never, I don't know if I'm going to quite be like the savior of the world. No, he showed up, and on several occasions, he referenced himself knowing who he was, the bread of life, the way, the light, the true vine. He referenced himself from a place of conviction of who he knew he was. And the way that you understand that is by knowing that you have a source to go to, which is bigger than yourself, to get your answers of who you are.
Yeah, I think that's hitting me really hard right now. The truth of that, because in reality, I rely wholly on God in Christ to sustain everything that I do. For every bit of my life, it's not me, right? It's purely because of God's goodness and His grace. So when I even for a moment think I've got this, or I'm the one that's making a paycheck, or I'm the one who's raising our kid, or I'm the one, any of that, the reality is God's the one that's giving us all the strength, all the guidance, all of the means necessary, and we don't need to even try to rely on ourselves. That does us no good.
Right, and it goes even a step further than that, is that when you find yourself in those moments, and we all fluctuate in and out of this,
Yeah.
Chase, where I find myself sometimes feeling so connected to God and feeling like I know who I am and what my purpose and passion is in life. And when you're operating from that place, the benefit to ourselves is so immense, because we find this vibrance in life, we find this energy, we find this understanding and confidence in who we are. And then when you lose sight of that, and when you go back into that self-centered place, which is that I have to control everything, or I have to be the one who manages everything, or I've got to dictate everything, you lose that. And it's right along that scripture that says, he that will lose his life for my name's sake shall find it. And the way that you lose your life for his sake is by simply just agreeing with everything he says, and then being willing to take action based on those things.
It's so hard to do.
Oh, man.
And so, okay, what about points in your life where you knew that God wanted you to lose more of yourself, lose more of your life, surrender it over to Him, but you bucked with that, and you fought it, and you kicked against the pricks for a little while?
Oh, man. Like, you think almost like you feel like Jonah, right?
Yeah.
You're like, I don't want to do that. And you're like, okay, well, you don't have to. Just go get eaten by a whale and then, go through hell until you do what you've got to do, what you were called to do, right? So I remember a particular time, happened to be while I was serving a mission for my church, and I was struggling. I was having a great time. I was doing what I wanted. I was not necessarily following all the rules. But I was having what I thought was a great time. And I remember my mission president, the president of our mission that we were on, he sat me down and he looked me straight in the eye and he said, "Hey, Tyler, I know what you're doing. I know you're breaking all the rules. You're not living up to who you are." He knew my grandfather, so he threw that in there too. He's like, "Your grandfather wouldn't be too pleased with what you're doing." And then he looked me in the eye and he said, "You're either with me, and in turn with God, or you're not. So what's it going to be right here, right now?" And I remember after that meeting, I had to look him in the eye and tell him I was with him. And then after that meeting, I remember going home just feeling so weighted and burdened and feeling like, man, I don't know if I can do this.
Do you mind if we step forward and grab him real quick? We're also tethered to each other, so that's...
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So I love you, August, man. Like,
I love you too, Uncle Ty. You're a good man.
yeah. So so I remember going home after that and thinking, like, I don't know if I have it in me to follow the rules to a T. But that was a turning point in my service as a missionary, because to that point, I'd been miserable. Every day had been dragging on, even though I thought I was having fun. And after that turn, what I realized is that when I lost myself in the service of what I believed was serving God, trying to preach His gospel and trying to serve people who were downtrodden, I found that the more that I lost myself to that cause, the deeper the joy was in my life. And I find that today, even in my practice right now. When I get busy being in touch with the fact, and this doesn't sound humble, but it is, that God has called me to be a teacher and a guide and a leader, and to do it through example. If I'm in touch with that, I have such joy and color and life. Whereas if I get busy going like, oh man, I wonder how much money I'm going to make today, or man, I wonder if I'm going to be able to do this or that or the other, or this is all on me, then it's like drudgery.
Yeah.
You know?
I'm thinking of all the times that I've done that, and it's making me cringe, you know, because...
But it's human. I mean, we all do it.
Yeah.
Right?
We really all do it. I haven't met anybody that doesn't have that as a woe of some form. Okay, so what about the people? Are there any examples in your life? So, you know, Christ, obviously the perfect example of humility and meekness, also gratitude. I mean, everything he embodied all of that. What about people in your own personal life that have captured that quality as well?
Of humility?
Yeah, of humility.
I reference my family members a lot, but my grandma Jean, she embodied that to me to a T. And it's interesting because she had a very simple life. You know, when I knew her, and as I knew her, and as I grew up, the only purpose she had in life, at least that I could gather, was to be a grandmother to me and my brothers and sisters and my cousins, and yet she found such joy in it, where she would sit and she would teach us about how she believed in God and the principles that she believed in, and then she'd just get busy loving us, and there wasn't any fanfare. You know, no one's going to ever really know who Jean Norton Patrick was other than her family, and yet she was maybe one of the best, finest people I know, because things were never really about her.
Wow.
They were about her family, because she believed that's what God wanted her to be doing, was taking care of her family, and she took such joy and pride, I should say, as we're talking about humility, but pride in the sense that, you know, she knew who she was as a leader and as a caretaker of the souls that she was connected to.
That's beautiful. I wish I had gotten to meet her before she passed away. You guys have always said
she was an amazing woman, and she had Alzheimer's for about 20 years, so there were some really interesting times too at the end there. But she never once, even through her Alzheimer's, lost the spirit of her humility. So, how about you, Chase? You got anyone in mind?
So the guy that comes to my mind is a friend from Idaho Falls. Chelsea and I lived there for just a year. The church that we went to was right on the same street that we lived on, and there was a guy in our congregation named Curtis Johnson, and Curtis Johnson he's a baker. He would bake bread and drop it off on our doorstep, probably at least, you know, once a month, if not once every couple of weeks. And it was all sorts of stuff. It was, you know, little pies, it was cinnamon rolls, it was just delicious treats on top of having a loaf of bread that he would bake and drop off. I happen to know that we're not the only ones that received that. So from talking to other people, there are other people who said, man, Curtis Johnson dropped off a loaf of bread. And half the time, it was at 5 a.m. when it's not like you're going to be over there chatting with them. I remember the first time we received it, I didn't know who it was from. I was like, well, this is super nice, you know, whoever, whatever Baker Angel dropped us off. But that's just one small example. Curtis would also, I remember one time riding my bike to work early in the morning in the winter. There's a foot of snow on the ground. Curtis Johnson is out with his snowplow, plowing the sidewalk for the whole block. He only lives in one house. He doesn't live in all of those houses. He's not responsible for any of that. He was out there serving selflessly and at an hour where nobody was going to be awake by the time that he got finished. So to me, there's selflessness is part of humility, and being willing to give of yourself. It was kind of like you were talking about with your grandma. I mean, the focus was never on her, as a grandma, right? That's what made that relationship even more powerful. And to me, this guy, this friend of ours, never demanding any kind of attention or recognition for the things that he was doing. That is a big deal.
That's a massive deal. And I think, again, it goes a little step deeper. It's like he could just do that because that's just what he does, or he does it because that's who he is.
Yeah.
And in my grandmother's case, in Curtis's case, they do those things because they're in touch with and knowing who they are. and I remember a time in my own life, it was early in my own recovery process, when I was so stuck in like this place of thinking I'm so terrible and I'm never going to be enough and I'm letting everybody down. And I remember a particular night that I was just so broken. I laid down on the floor. I could barely move. I mean, I felt lethargic from shame, and I cried out. I cried out in prayer to God, just vocally by myself. And I remember feeling completely filled with love. And I had thoughts come into my mind that said, Tyler, like, you are my son, and you are a teacher and a guide, and you are a force for good in this world. And I thought to myself, I felt such a distinction between, man, I suck, and how could this be true when I do suck? And yet that's exactly how it works. And so I go, okay, yeah, I have my weaknesses, and I've got to work on those weaknesses. But we've heard a scripture before that says that when men come to me, I will show them their weaknesses, and I give men weakness that they may be humble, right? And if they'll humble themselves before me and have faith in me, then I will make weak things become strong. And that has been my experience in all aspects of my life, that when I finally break, and I mean break in a really good way, where you break into God, when you break into something bigger than yourself, He makes more out of us than we could ever make of ourselves, and He does it with our garbage. He takes our garbage and He makes us somebody so much more magnificent than we could ever make of ourselves. Yeah. And that's been my experience time and time again. And it's still a challenge, like every day. I know that if I were to go give my other weaknesses over right now, He would make them strong, but it would come through hell. And it's hard to give that over, but it's just a true principle.
Okay, well, while we're here, how about let's have a commitment. What is one weakness of yours that you're ready to now give up?
Oh man, I don't know. I know the weaknesses. I don't know if I'm ready to say it out loud, because I don't know. I don't want to go through the hell, right?
I know. That's what I'm trying. I want you to vocalize it so bad to hold you accountable.
Well, I think one of the things that I have as a weakness of mine is that I often live in fear, especially as it relates to taking care of my family. And the way that fear manifests itself is that I never give anything up. Like I told you the other day, yeah. I'm a job collector, right? I don't transition jobs. I just add more and more jobs. So it's like
you're at capacity too right now.
We're at full capacity. I think the last week I've been averaging 18-hour days, and it's just it's been crazy. And there's something inside of you that knows something has to break, something has to give. And every time I think about that, then there's this fear that comes in and says, yeah, but what if you lose this, or what if you lose that, or how are you going to manage this? And of course we know that fear and shame and doubt are the opposite end of what humility is. And it's just a matter of getting your heart to that place, the broken heart and the contrite spirit, to be able to do it. And I don't know if I've gotten there yet.
I don't think so.
Yeah, and I want to.
Yeah.
You know, I want to, and I think I'm much closer than I ever have been. But I'm moving in the right direction. I don't know if I'm ready to hold myself accountable all the way yet, but I want to. You know, and I think sometimes that's what it takes, is it takes that little bit of a step and those little moments and those little breaks. And there you go, bud.
He's just looking for something to play with.
Yeah, he just wants to get busy with stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what I'm working on right now.
Man.
And I know that sometimes comes in, it doesn't always come instantly because of pride, because of my unwillingness to let God be God.
Right. When we were driving up, you said, I asked you what terms had come to your mind, and you said willingness was one of the first ones. Willingness and surrender. And I look back and I think of all the times that I had that. Those are some of the best times. Like really hard transitions, you know, because you're taking these steps in the dark and you're saying, all right, God, I'm trusting
this
you
feels
fully here.
Yeah.
Take Jesus, take the wheel. You know?
Yeah.
And but then at the same time, the reward, the feeling of knowing that you have that much faith in God's abilities to make something good of you. That's amazing. I mean, even right now, as we're working on this project with Love Strong, I've had these waves where I get down on myself. I'm, you know, that bully in your head of I'm the worst, all of that. But then these high points of God trusts you and he trusts me so fully that he's willing to give us this great challenge. You know, this is an adventure, but it's also one of the greatest challenges that we could embark on. And trying to help people overcome sexual addiction, trying to help people tap into their true selves.
Wholeheartedly.
Yeah, reclaiming their hearts wholly. What a big task.
What a massive task.
Yeah.
And it's funny because even since we started the project, and we feel like we have these moments where we are acting from this place of humility and willingness and saying, God, we'll do whatever you want us to do, and it feels right. When we do it, there's always a feeling of liberation. It's not never easy.
You're right.
And it doesn't, almost never turns out the way that you've drew it up in your mind.
Yeah.
But there is that feeling of liberation and peace that comes with it. And I've experienced it even with you in the project many times. And yet every time there's a new step to take. There's that fear that you have to learn to step through and surrender back over to the process of saying, well, if this is what God wants, this is what I've got to do.
Yeah.
And it's been a really cool growing experience, and it's an ongoing process. It's our hearts are so prideful by nature, you know. And I mean prideful in terms of self-controlling, like you know. And I think that's the constant struggle throughout our whole lives, is learning how to cultivate that humble, that heart, that ability to turn towards somebody bigger than yourself and say, I'm willing to give whatever I've got to give for your purposes. And it's been a really rich journey so far.
Yeah.
So, well, you got anything else that's on your mind, Chase?
Honestly, I feel really good about the discussion we've had and the way that we've covered it. So
awesome.
Yeah.
Well, let's call it a wrap. Thanks, you guys.